Welcome back to He's a Giant, a pod about your future Super Bowl champion, New York Football Giants. I'm your host, Sal, here with my co-host, Monty. What's going on, man?
What's going on, man? It's been a fun week, kind of just watching highlights and shit on our new draft picks. The hopium in the air is real. But yeah, bring it back down to earth a little bit this episode, and try to compare some of these rosters.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a lot of fun this past week. The draft happened. We had a really fun episode the night that the draft concluded. A lot of people tuned in. I think people were psyched. I'm psyched. I've been psyched all week. I've been happy. I don't know you. I've been happy all week.
You have
Like
been.
people are kind of freaked out by me. They're like, "Are you okay?" Like, and I'm like, "No, dude. I've only known you people on Twitter for what, like, really, like, the last 3, 4 years. Been fucking miserable the whole time. Like, of course I've been miserable, but you guys never saw me, like, when the Giants were good. I'm a hardcore fan. I'm a Mets fan, for God's sake. Like, I live off, like, whatever optimism I can hold on to. So, nah, dude, I'm psyched. The Giants have given me life, and I'm pumped, and I'm gonna root like hell for this thing to go forward and hit. I'm rooting for Joe Schoen, rooting for Brian Dable, rooting for these players. I love it. I want to thank everybody who's here, by the way. I don't even know who's in here. I know Chris Rossetti's in here. Thank you, Chris Rossetti, for
It's our
representing the
guy.
Giants. Chris, thank you for representing the Giants front office so consistently on He's a Giant. I have zero doubt in my mind that our draft was finally good because you were in here listening to us and
He's doing his
having a
work.
yeah, dude, you were listening to us and having a nice, good back and forth feedback. We learned from each other. You took those notes back to Joe Shane and you said, "Look, Joe Shane, stop being a fucking idiot and do what these guys want you to do." And it worked. So I appreciate that.
He stood on the table for White Brandon Jacobs. He stood on a table here, and he stood in the table in the real draft room.
Exactly. White Brandon Jacobs is here. All because of Chris Rossetti, the finest man in the New York Football Giants front office. Anyway, thank all of you for being here. Today's episode, we wanted to, before we go into the 2026 season, which is like 2026 prospect season, which is not that far away actually for us to do. We want to do a little bit of a deep dive into the Giants roster now that we've seen the draft take place and we have seen free agency conclude, at least the first wave of free agency. There's always another wave, after June 1st, and then there's obviously roster cuts in addition. So the roster is not finalized by any means, but I think we have a pretty good idea of what it's going to look like going into season. Monty, you brought this idea up, so why don't you introduce the premise of today's show to everybody?
Yeah, so essentially the idea was at the end of the season, there's a really viral quote by John Mara was he was basically asked, "Do you think that this roster is better today than when Joe Shane got in here?" And he said, "I don't know if I can say that basically." And so, and when that happened, I think a lot of us are probably like, it's fair. That's a fair thing to say because I don't know if it's better. And we never really kind of broke it down, but looking at it, it's like, yeah, that's probably a fair way to say it. But a lot has changed this offseason. We've been very, very happy with both the free agency and the draft. So at this point, we want to kind of take a look at both if it was a fair comment at the time and is it still a fair comment. So we're going to go position group by position group and say, hey, we'll break it down in detail and what have we improved or have we gotten worse?
Yep. Um, when John Mara said that, it was echoing something that I think a few of us were saying as the season went on, which was, is this team even any better than Dave Gettleman's team? Because it doesn't look like it's better. It's certainly not performing better than Dave Gettleman's team. In fact, it's going backwards. And when you started looking at the roster, you're like, are we really better? Like, I mean, and we'll get into it, but it was really like concerning that 3 years into Joe Shane's regime and his reign as GM, I don't think you could have made any kind of case that was better. I was actually of the mindset that it was actually worse. And don't get me wrong, I think Dave Gettleman might be the worst executive I've seen in any New York sports team in my lifetime. And for me to like have that like mental, thought process, like, is this actually worse than Gettleman, was shocking. But, I think what John Mara said was right to the point that, yeah, I think everybody felt that way. And Joe Shane had a mandate. I don't think the mandate was necessarily just, okay, you got to win a bunch of games. I think the mandate was fix this shit and fix it
Mm-hmm.
quick. And a lot of people said, no, this takes years. You can't just, Rome wasn't built overnight. Let's see. Let's take a look at this roster and see how quickly he was able to turn this thing around and whether or not he's actually accomplished it, right? Oh, Rocco's here to say good night. Good night, Rocco.
Good
Thank
night,
you for being
Rocco.
part. Thank you for being part of our early part of our episode. I hope you have a good sleep and have nice dreams about Quinn Ewers winning the job in Miami. Um,
Zach Wilson's number 0. He's guaranteed to be him out.
there's no way Quinn Ewers isn't going to be the starting quarterback of the Dolphins at some point this season. Like that's like the best. That's legitimately the best spot for a rookie quarterback to go because like Tua's always like one sack away from being put on like hospice. So like like it's almost over for him.
And Zach
So
Wilson chose number 0, which means he's guaranteed to get cut.
yeah, he's going to get cut. Anyway, so let's go into it. So do you want to go position group by position group, or how do you want to tackle this?
Yeah, I would say position by position group. We can, if you want to go into a little more detail in the line, we can do that. But yeah, I would say let's do position group by position group.
All right. So what we did was we pulled up the depth charts of the Giants um, when Joe Schoen took over in January 2022. And we looked at the depth chart of the Giants in January 2025 when this season concluded. And we have the depth chart now. So let's look at January of 2022. Let's start with the wide receiver room. You want to start there?
Sure.
Our starting wide receivers in January of 2022 were Kenny Galladay, Kadarius Toney, and Darius Slayton. The backups were John Ross and Colin Johnson. You got that, everybody?
Brutal.
Our that was our starting wide receiver room when Dave Gettleman left the Giants. I'll say it one more glorious time: Kenny Galladay and Kadarius Toney, with Darius Slayton and John Ross and Colin Johnson as your backups. So that's what Joe Shane did inherit. Um, that's rough, right? Now we did think that maybe there was something there with Kadarius Toney at the time. That we thought maybe, just maybe, we got something because he was a first round pick the year before. Galladay looked like he was cooked. Um, Slayton was Slayton. Wasn't anything special at that point. Consistent, but nothing to write home about. John Ross was a bust. Colin Johnson did nothing, but that was our room. That's rough. You start reading these things, you start feeling bad for Daniel Jones.
Yeah,
But that
that's
was the room.
brutal. It's not about not having a wide receiver 1. It was just ass.
It's like not having wide receiver 0.
Yeah.
Um, Now, here was the depth chart when we got to. I actually opened up February 1st, 2025 of this year. And this was the wide receiver room then at the conclusion of the 2024 season. Malik Neighbors, Darius Slayton, Wandale Robinson as the starters, excuse me, with Bryce Ford Wheaton, Jalen Hyatt, Emir Smith Marset, and I guess you could count Gunnar Olszewski as backups. So what's the gap there from when he took over to the beginning of this offseason?
I mean, pretty significant. I mean, the biggest one being Malik Neighbors. I mean, that Malik, we kind of talked about when it happened. Malik Neighbors, basically demoting all the other everybody else in that room, really gave the room some identity, and it allowed Darius Slayton to be a solid wide receiver too. Wandale Robinson to take his slot role, and then you have your true alpha in Malik Neighbors. I would say that is the bar was low, but they certainly cleared it.
Right. Now here's a current room. And I think this is obviously it's a little
This one's
tricky
pretty
because
similar.
it's very similar, but it's a lot of added bodies. I think it's worth talking about them. So still you have Neighbors, Slayton, and Wandale as your starting trio with Jalen Hyatt as a backup. But you also have Zach Pascal, who they brought in as a free agent from Arizona. Lil Jordan Humphrey, don't forget him. He's on the team from Denver. And you still have Bryce Ford Wheaton, Emir Smith Marset on the roster. They also brought in Montreal Washington, um, and a bunch of, and I mean a bunch
Oh,
of UDFAs. Six UDFA wide receivers. Um, Juice Wells, who's worth talking about. Bo Collins from Notre Dame. Nate McCollum, Daquan Felton, Dalen Cambry, Jordan Bly. I'm going to ignore Cambry, Bly, McCollum, and even Collins for now. Although Collins is just kind of a good all-around player. But What do you think about that room? And then add in what, then give me your thoughts on both Juice Wells and Daquan Felton and whether or not you think they can make this team.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously, just the bodies makes it better, but I certainly don't think it really upgraded too much. Juice Wells is the guy that I have my eyes on. I don't know a ton about DeQuan Felton. I have to know a little bit more about Bo Collins, but I don't necessarily think that they're going to be making the team. Um, Juice Wells is the interesting one, though. That was, he has the connection with Jackson Dart. He was a guy who absolutely, we talked about him a little bit at the end of last week's episode when the signing happened. And, he's a guy who tore up James Madison, transferred to South Carolina, was third in the SEC in receiving yards his first year at South Carolina, got hurt the next year, transferred to Ole Miss, and didn't really have that great of a season this year. He's been downhill kind of ever since that injury, but this was a guy who was getting first round buzz at one point in time. Obviously the connection with Jackson Dart. I think more than likely this is a guy who will end up as a practice squad guy, but he is the guy I'm keeping an eye on. Is can he make the roster?
Yeah, I mean, very quickly on Wells, he is a flanker. He's a big, strong receiver, can play mostly on the outside, but plays a decent number of slot reps. I do think the Giants are angling to bring in another flanker. Somebody, not obviously Malik Neighbors, but somebody in that same mold. The size prototype is typically around 6 feet, 200 pounds, 210 pounds. These are guys who typically play outside, inside, depending on what you need them to do. They can mix and match, and they allow you versatility. Um, I really believe that they want to get away from being pigeonholed into where they put their receivers around a stationary chess piece, which is Wan'Dale Robinson. You have to basically create your wide receiver room around Wan'Dale Robinson because he can't play anywhere but the slot, essentially. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think they're trying to bring in somebody who has versatility so you can start moving neighbors into the slot, moving the other guy outside, sliding people around. So I think Wells definitely fits into that category. The other thing they might want to be thinking about doing is just bringing in a true X receiver. We don't
Mm-hmm.
really have a classical X. Daquan Felton is an X receiver. He's a big dude. He's about 6'5", 215, strong receiver, big bodied guy. A little bit of Isaiah Hodgins type in his game, like a strong big guy who can play both the slot and the outside. But truly, he's mostly an outside receiver, and he runs a lot of goes and comebacks and things like that, but he has some juice to him. So I think those two are guys that you can see making the roster. I don't know which one of them is going to be good on special teams because I think that's a big part of it. But just the four starters, Neighbor, Slayton, Wandale, Hyatt, are better than the five we had when Dave Gettleman left, right? Just by a considerable margin. And
Yeah.
then you add in Emir Smith Marset, who has become a phenomenal return guy.
Mm-hmm.
And Bryce Ford Wheaton, that's six right there. So the question is, are these guys going to be threatening Hyatt and Bryce Ford Wheaton for spots? I think that's what, or maybe Jalen Hyatt, maybe Wan'Dale Robinson is a target to move in a package. Who knows? I don't think he is, but it's possible. But like, I think that Wells and Daquan Felton have some ability to make the roster depending on who performs in camp. Any way you slice it, the wide receiver room is, I would say, multiple grades above what it was when Joe Schoen took over.
Yeah, I think ultimately any of these UDFA's they have an uphill battle to make it. I don't think they're going to be overly worried about any of these guys getting stolen off their practice squad unless they really ball out. So I think probably the plan will be to stash them, but we'll see how see how they show up.
Yeah, I mean, I think there should be allowed to compete, right? Whoever
Mm-hmm.
competes the best should win jobs, right? And we'll see what they do. But either way, this one is multiple notches in Joe Shane's belt.
Agreed.
You you want to move on to the next group?
Yeah. What do you want to do next?
Let's stick with the let's stick with some positional players here on the offense. Tight end room.
This is
When
interesting.
Joe Shane took over, he still had Evan Ingram, though he was becoming an unrestricted free agent. Kyle Rudolph and Chris Myrick. That was the room he took over. So Ingram, Rudolph, and Myrick. At the end of the season, well, let's say December of this year, Theo Johnson, Daniel Bellinger, Chris Manhertz, Greg Dulcich, and right now it is the same plus Thomas Fidone aka Dino Dong. So not a big difference between now and before the draft. Although Thomas Fidone is very interesting, I think he has a chance to displace Bellinger. Um, but compared to where Joe Shane took over, are we better? Are we slightly better? Are we worse? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'll add the caveat, like you mentioned, that Evan Ingram was an undrafted free or the undrafted UD. He was a UDFA unrestricted free agent, and we were very tight in cap. Joe Shane was not trying to spend money. He was not trying to push money back. He was trying to reset the cap.
That's
With
fair.
that said, Evan Ingram is better than anybody on our roster. It's been a good amount of time, and we've spent draft picks on tight end. We haven't spent a considerable amount of draft capital. It's been more day 3 picks, but we've gone out in free agency. We got guys like Chris Manor. It was a very good ad, but we haven't added a guy who can be a difference maker on the tight end position that we've seen. Maybe there's a world where Theo Johnson can become that this year. He was only a rookie last year. He's a guy that they have a lot of hope in, but we haven't seen it. And Evan Ingram went on and was a better player than we saw the last couple of years in New York, in Jacksonville. And I think everyone kind of saw that coming. It felt like he was just the guy who needed to change the scenery. Kyle Rudolph was always a disaster signing, but he's still, compared to what the guys we have around here, similar level. I would definitely say we downgraded here.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Pains me to say it, but it's true because we just haven't gotten anything out of Bellinger really, and we
Mm-hmm.
haven't gotten anything out of Manhurts other than blocking, and we have gotten nothing out of Dulcich so far. We don't know what Fedone is. Maybe he makes a difference here, but Theo Johnson is one this is all banked on, and don't forget we had Darren Waller here. I think if we still
Mm-hmm.
had Darren Waller, we'd be better,
Yeah,
but we don't have Darren Waller.
it improved for like on paper for a little bit, and then it didn't
Right.
work out.
But as it stands, I would agree that this room is slightly downgraded compared to before, and it's just because Evan Ingram is better than anybody we have right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's funny because you can't say they don't value the tight end position, because they clearly do. They went and made a move for Darren Waller. They've addressed it in free agency. I mean, they've addressed it in the draft and free agency. They've really spent time with it. It's just they haven't addressed like premium capital into it outside of Waller.
Let's go to the next position group room. And this one is going to be really interesting. So when Joe Shane took over, our running back room was Saquon Barkley, Devontae Booker, Elijah Penny, and Cullen Gillespie. Remember that guy?
Yeah, the the
Um,
the, the
eh,
Earth Day guy.
yeah. What we had at the end of this season was Tyrone Tracy, Devin Singletary, Eric Gray, and Dante Miller. And what we have now is Tyrone Tracy, Devin Singletary, Cam Scattaboo, Eric Gray, and Dante Miller. Are we better now than we were as a room than when Joe Shane took over?
So I will say replacing Saquon Barkley is an almost impossible task. I mean, what he meant to this team as far as a leadership role, what he meant to this team from just a playmaking role, where he was really one of the only guys in this team who could break open a game and get a good play. It's something that I think last year it was clear when we didn't have that. I think that the missing that was a really obvious. I will say I would not put this room better than it, because Saquon Barkley is just such a valuable piece. But I will say we will get into the offensive line. But when you don't have an offensive line that can give Saquon Barkley a lot of yards before contact, this is a guy who is prone to negative plays. He's a guy who doesn't have the opportunity to get, those game-breaking huge plays as often as he does now in Philadelphia. It feels like in Philadelphia he's doing that 3 times a game. We got it maybe 1 time a game here. It's just, it was tougher to break those. While I think guys like now we're looking at Tyrone Tracy, Cam Scattaboo, Devin Singletary. I think these are guys who get less negative plays, don't get as many of those big explosive plays, but I think the overall efficiency of the run game, I mean, you saw it last year. It did go up from when Saquon left. I do think it fits kind of what we need where we are as an offense at this point in time. You just can just pound the ball, get positive yards, and make it second and short, third and short. That's the goal. So no, I can't give the running back an improvement, but I will say there's certainly an argument for it.
Gun to your head, which room do you want? The one he inherited or the one he has now?
I think the one he has now is a smart way to build a football team. I think
Okay.
I think having multiple guys where Saquon Barkley gets hurt, what is that offense now? Your offense is completely different. If Tyrone Tracy gets hurt, you're fine. Cam
Yep.
Scatterbo gets hurt, you're fine. Devin Singletary gets hurt, you're fine. You have other guys in the room, keep going. You're averaging over 4 yards per carry. You definitely have to find different ways to create explosive plays, but I'd rather do that to create an offense that's reliant on the pass game than the running back.
Yeah, I agree with you actually. I mean, it's hard to give the nod to anything that doesn't have Barkley here because Barkley is he's a game changer. And there's nobody on this roster that's a game changer at running back that we know of yet. Um, Even Scatterbo, who we have a lot of faith in and hope that he would change the dynamic of the offense, he's not typically a guy who's going to break off a bunch of big runs, right? That's not his game.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, like you said, overall, these are guys who are interchangeable in many ways. They complement each other well. The room keeps moving, right? It's not dependent on one or two people. So I'm actually going to call this a wash. I'll be honest. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think what you're getting in this room, in the current room, is you're getting a hedging of your bet across different people so that injury does not destroy your run game, or poor performance on one guy doesn't destroy your run game, and you have nice compliments here. But what you're losing is game changing ability. You're basically trading that, right? You're trading Barkley's game changing ability for consistency. And I think right now I'd probably call it a wash.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I would probably I think on paper it's still Saquon. Jabri also pointed out, and he's what did we have? No, that was 2022. Did we Matt Breida we added when
I'm sorry,
Dable came
Brightwell
in?
was on the team. He was hurt then. That's why he's
Yeah,
not showing up on the roster at that point. He was hurt then, but you're
but
right.
Burrito was added when they brought in Dable, right?
Yeah, Breida came in later. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
but we had Brightwell, but he was hurt.
okay, but yeah. So yeah, I would say yeah to what you said. I would still probably give him the nod, but yeah, I guess certainly wash is fair. I guess wash is fair because it certainly could go either way.
Yeah. So we have one for Joe Shane, one against Joe Shane, one wash so far. It's closer than I thought it would be. Um, let's go to offensive line. This was the offensive line that Joe Shane inherited. Andrew Thomas, Matt Skura, Billy Price, Will Hernandez, Nate Solder. The backups were Corey Cunningham, Ben Bredesen, um, Matt. They had Matt Skura as a backup as well, and Wes Martin. That was the O line that he inherited. There were a lot of guys on IR, but that was basically the line that ended the season. The line that ended this past season, Andrew Thomas, John Runyon. Well, obviously Andrew Thomas was hurt, but Andrew Thomas, John Runyon, JMS, Greg Van Roden, and Jermaine Illuminor with Josh Azudu, Aaron Stinney, Austin Schlottman, Jake Kubis, and Evan Neal as backups. And the current line, as I would project it to be, is Thomas, Runyon, JMS, Greg Van Roten, Jermaine Illuminor, Marcus Bowe, Evan Neal, um, Jake Kubis, and oh, James Hudson with Aaron Stinney, Austin Schlottman, and Stone Forsythe, Morrissey, all these guys kind of fighting for jobs. Which line is better?
I mean, I would definitely say that the offensive line is getting improved. Let's see, as far as where specifically improved, I don't know. Let's start at tackle here. Um, obviously Andrew Thomas on both sides. Andrew Thomas, I do think, has become a better player today than he was then, but obviously the injury concerns and things like that. And then moving on from Nate Solder to Jermaine Illuminor, as much as Jermaine Luminor is more just an average tackle in the NFL, it feels like we have an all pro compared to that guy. It was brutal to watch Nate Solder. Um, Funny enough is Matt Parrott, who is also pretty brutal here, has actually had some success over in Denver. But I would say the tackles, mostly because Jermaine Illuminor has improved. What do you say about the tackles, Sal?
Yeah, way improved. Jermaine Illuminor is the best right tackle we've had since Kareem McKenzie.
Yeah.
And really, he is.
Mhm.
It's a yes, absolutely. It's a substantially improved. The interior line is better. JMS is concerning, but he's still not. He's like along the lines of the guys we've had over the years. Like he's not. He's better than Billy Price.
Yeah, I mean,
You know,
you could make the argument for, you know, Nick Gates over JMS, but it's close.
John Runyon and Greg Van Roten, Evan Neal maybe sliding in at right guard, but Marcus Bowe, they're all better than the other interior linemen we've had over the years. To me, this is not close. This is a much better O line.
Yeah, I mean
I think
Shane.
yeah, you have tackles, you have guards that are decent, you have guard depth. It's not great, but it's way better than I think what he inherited.
Yeah, I mean, like Shane Lemieux is real bad. Ben Bredesen wasn't really being used yet, but he did become a usable player. But still worse than Runyon. Honestly, worse than Van Roten in my opinion. I thought Van Roten was a more consistent player than Bredesen was, but those two are probably close. And then like as funny as like these aggregators got Giants fans on this thing that Will Hernandez was a good football player over in Arizona, but he was fine, but they were like pushing like his like first 2 weeks like last year was like get a couple good games. And there's a reason that he's a free agent right now.
I mean, he
So
was better in Arizona than he was here.
yeah,
Um,
but he wasn't that
but
great.
he was horrible here. Like people have a
Yeah.
lot of they have a lot of selective memory when it comes to his performance here as a Giant, except for his rookie year.
Hmm.
O line, I think to me, O line is quite a bit better. Better depth, better
Agreed.
starters, better tackles. So we're better. We're not there yet, but it's way better than what we had. And then the
Agreed.
final offensive group, obviously quarterback. Our quarterbacks to end the season are Mike Glennon and Jake Fromm, obviously with Daniel Jones hurt, but basically Daniel Jones, he inherited Daniel Jones, Mike Glennon, and Jake Fromm, turned that into Daniel Jones and Tyrod Taylor and what's his name, Davis Webb, but basically inherited Jones, Fromm, and Glennon, and obviously when he ended this season, it was Locke, DeVito, Boyle, and now it's Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, and Jackson Dart.
Yep. Yeah. And even if we were just talking about like Daniel Jones and Tyrod Taylor, like I definitely think we've improved the roster here. Obviously, looking into the end of the season, Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, Tommy DeVito. Did you improve? Maybe you could say like Drew Lock over Mike Lennon. Like, I don't know. That's like that was pretty much a wash. But since then, I think Russell Wilson's a much more proven quarterback than Daniel Jones, who I rely on much more. I think Jameis Winston is a high end backup and kind of in the vein of Tyrod Taylor when we brought in him. And you finally have a young, promising quarterback in Jackson Dart. We'll see if he becomes anything, but that is a crucial part to the quarterback room is having a guy that maybe you can develop into somebody who you're actively trying to develop, which is something we haven't had in a long time.
Yeah, this isn't freaking close. I mean, that room that we ended 2021 with was embarrassing. Even with Daniel Jones, it's embarrassing. Um, But there's a theme here that this particular room, I think, exemplifies that I want to get to at the end of the discussion. But I'll tease it now, which is there's actually a bigger gap between the roster we have today and the roster we had 3 months ago than the roster we had 3 months ago and the roster Joe Schoen inherited 3 years ago.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
that's where the gap happened in the last 3 months.
I didn't even think about it, but when John Mara was saying it, Daniel Jones wasn't even on the roster, so it was literally Daniel Jones, Mike Lennon, and Fromm versus Drew Lock and Tommy DeVito.
So on offense, wide receiver room much better,
Mm-hmm.
O line much better, quarterback room much better, running back room you could argue it either way, probably a wash depending on what you value. Tight end room worse. Um, this one is in Joe Shane's favor. I mean, the offense is better. But if you just snapshotted like if you just snapshotted the team in January or February of 2025, it would be a lot closer.
Yeah, let's
Um,
let let's go through that real quick. I mean, wide receiver still much better.
right. Offensive
Offensive
line
better.
better.
Um,
Tight end not better. Running back
I
not
don't think I could give
not
it without Scottaboo.
nope, not running back not better. Tight end not better. Quarterback not better.
Yep.
Big gap between 3 months ago and now. You
Mm-hmm.
know, that's where the gap is. So on offense, he made some strides here.
Did.
Let's go to defense. On the defensive side of the ball, the defensive line when Joe Shane took over, Leonard Williams, Dexter Lawrence, Austin Johnson. That was our starters. Raymond Johnson, Danny Shelton, and Quincy Roche were the backups. It's a fucking good group, by the way. Um,
Yeah.
other than fat ass Danny Shelton. Um, what we had just a few months ago, Raheem Nunez Roches, Dexter Lawrence, DJ Davidson, Elijah Chapman, Jordan Riley, Armon Watts. And then you had guys like Garcia, Durden, and Horn getting reps. And what you have today is Dexter Lawrence, Darius Alexander, Jeremiah Ledbetter, Robertson Harris, Raheem Nunez Richardson, DJ Davidson, and then the other guys. Just from the interior D line guys. I'm not including although I think he'll play there as a defensive end. I'm not including Colston in this, but let's
Mm-hmm.
go right there. Are we better or worse as a unit than when he took over?
I would say we're worse. I would say that was Dave Gettleman's strength was he put a lot of capital into the interior defensive line. It could have been even better if he didn't trade a guy like BJ Hill. Um, Austin Johnson was a pretty good grab who's been valued around the league. And just add on to, Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence was a phenomenal interior defensive line. The only argument you can make is that Dexter Lawrence is so much of a better player now than he was then that it makes up for the difference of Austin Johnson and Leonard Williams. But I don't even if you took that spin, I don't know if that's true. Like Leonard Williams is a fantastic football player. Austin Johnson's a very solid one. We're on our way. You added a guy in Darius Alexander who's gets NFL comps to Leonard Williams. Maybe we can get back to those days if you can have Andre Patterson develop a guy like that. But as of today, that is a hard group to pass.
Yeah, it's a worse room. Now, what's interesting is what it is right now. This is all hinging on Darius Alexander and maybe the role Colston plays if we slide him into this role.
Golston.
Yeah, this sort of hinges on that, right? But there's no way on paper you can look at this unit and say it's better than it was 3 years ago. It got downgraded.
Agreed. Yeah. I mean, you added some depth. The most important move was adding Darius Alexander, seeing what I don't expect his rookie year to be like this phenomenal player. I think he's going to be an improvement to what we've had by a good bit. But to get anywhere near a Leonard Williams level player, you got some time there.
Yep.
If you get
Um,
there.
exactly. All right, let's go to the edge room or Yeah, let's just go to we'll just call it linebackers. Um, what he had when he took over: Lorenzo Carter, Reggie Ragland, Tay Crowder, Aziz Ojulari, with Bernard McKinney as a backup, along with Cam Brown. Um, that was your that was your room at the time. There's probably somebody I'm missing that might have been an IR, but for the most part, well, Carter Coughlin was also obviously on the team.
Did you
He was an
say?
IR.
Did you say O'Shane Zimenez and Aziz?
That's right. O'Shea Jimenez. I did say these.
Let's do edges and then off ball.
Okay, fine. The edges. Let's reset that. Edges would have been Aziz Ojulari, Reggie Ragland, O'Shane Jimenez, Bernard McKinney, and uh, I think that's it.
Lorenzo Carter, you could argue.
Lorenzo Carter. Yes, Lorenzo Carter was on that team. That was your team then for edges. And then this is the edge group that we had at the end of this season: Brian Burns, uh, Kayvon Thibodeau, Aziz Ojulari, Tillman Fox, Patrick Johnson. And then the edge room now, um, obviously, Brian Burns, Abdul Carter, Kayvon Thibodeau, and let's put Chauncey Colston here because we didn't include him in the last group,
Mm-hmm.
as well as Tillman Fox. This one's easy.
Yeah, I mean that was a brutal edge room. That you know we got who Golden. We got Marcus Golden for that 1 year, the in here. But outside of that, we couldn't do anything on the edge, which is such a brutal waste of what we had there with Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence. And we just completely wasted that interior defensive line room with no edge. We drastically improved it even last year. Very happy, really good sack production while those guys were healthy. And then you went ahead and you added Abdul Carter and Chauncey Golston. I mean, they it's improved 10 times over. This is probably the most improved group.
Yep. This is a monstrous group. So way better. It was better before the draft and the offseason. It's way better now. So this one's definitely a feather in his cap. So D line, no. Edge room, yes. How about inside linebacker? This is what he inherited. Tay Crowder. Um, let me see. Tay
Blake
Crowder and
Martinez.
Blake Martinez were the starters. Who the hell
Re-
else was on there?
Blake Martinez, Tay Crowder, Reggie
Carter Coughlin
Ragland, Carter Coughlin,
and Cam Brown.
Dan Brown. Yep.
That's what he inherited. What he had at the end of last year: Bobby Okereke, Michael McFadden, Darius Mosow, Deontay Johnson, Matt Adams, Ty Summers. And what he has now is very similar. Bobby Okereke, Michael McFadden, Deontay Johnson, Darius Mosow. He has replaced some of the guys that have left. He still has Ty Summers here, but he has Demetrius Flanagan Fowles and Chris Board as additions from free agency. Um, are we better or were we worse than than our inside linebacker room when Joe Schoen took over?
I would definitely say we improved. I mean, Blake Martinez had, he had his shine. He had, definitely some of the better linebacker seasons we've seen because we had a pretty brutal decade there of off-ball linebacker play, and he gave us 100+ tackles and all that. But now Joe Schoen has added, two guys who have done that for us with Bobby Okereke and Mike McFadden. Bobby Okereke hasn't been as valuable as he was under Wink, but he's still a good football player. And Mike McFadden has definitely been one of our best, day 3 picks during if probably the best day 3 pick from the Joe Schoen era. He's he's an imperfect player, but he is a very solid starter we've added. And then, there's not much depth there. I really like the Chris Board signing. I'll say that. I think that helped this room a good bit depth wise.
A
Even when
special teamer.
yeah, but he can play too. Like he stepped in for Baltimore last year when like Trenton Simpson went down. He has some coverage chops. I really think we're gonna like him. I think he's gonna be a good player for us. But yeah, I would say this is definitely an improved room. Really low
Yeah.
bar, but it's an improved room.
I think I think your starters are just so much better. Like Okereke
Hmm.
is better than anything we had before, and McFadden is probably better than anything we had before, other than Blake Martinez in 2021. He was better than McFadden, um, but he was hurt coming into 2022, and I think both of these guys are an upgrade over what we had.
Agreed.
So that room's better. So edge is better, inside linebacker is better. Let's go to safety. So what we had in the safety room, that Jabril Peppers was hurt, but they had him on the team. He's coming off the team. They had Logan Ryan, Xavier McKinney, Stephen Parker, Julian Love, and J.R. Reed. So obviously the big names there being McKinney, Logan Ryan, Julian Love, and Peppers, who was a free agent going into the year.
That's a really
They
good one.
obviously, yeah, they obviously lost Peppers to New England, and Logan Ryan was cut. They finished with McKinney and Love as their starters, who had really good years, but that's the room they inherited. It's pretty solid. What we had at the end of this year was Tyler Nubin and Jason Pinnock, with Belton and Anthony Johnson, um, Elijah Reed, Elijah Riley, and Raheem Lane as our safety room.
Hmm.
Um, and what we have now is obviously different. It is Tyler Nubin with Javon Holland starting, but we also have Belton, Anthony Johnson, Raheem Lane, and now Makari Page, the UDFA from Michigan, that we signed. We have all those guys as part of our safety room. Are we better or worse? This one's actually kind of tough.
It was definitely significantly worse before going into this offseason. I would say, I mean, let's just start by comparing the starters because we can compare the room as a whole right after. Comparing the starters is interesting. You compare Xavier McKinney to Javon Holland, and the player that we had in McKinney in New York, I don't think is much of a downgrade to what Javon Holland is, if at all. Javon Holland's a very good football player. He's had his injury issues, but I think over his first 4 years total, I think Javon Holland was a better football player. So we'll see what he brings here. And then you compare Julian Love to Tyler Nubin. Julian Love being a guy who, was basically a backup for most of his career, but had a really good season his last year here. Um, Comparing to kind of what we're hoping to see this next year out of Tyler Nubin, a second-year player who was one of the better defensive rookies in the NFL. I would say that's close. Um, that one's tough. I could almost call that one a wash, but I think where it gets really difficult is you have Logan Ryan on that team, who was a good
Hmm.
football player,
Yeah,
and you
Jabril
have
Peppers on the team.
the drill player. That's a really, really, really good safety room that they had that year. Um,
Yeah,
so
I
for
think
that
20.
reason, that.
I think that the safety room that we had in 22 was better than anything we've seen since. And
Mhm.
I think that it's still better than the room we have now. And I think we have a good room, but I don't think like that safety room was ridiculous. The talent on that safety room was unreal. Um, and so versatile. So remember, Julian Love was a backup, he was kind of an
Mhm.
afterthought because of the other guys. And he ended up starting for us right away in 23, and I mean, excuse me, in 22. So
He,
that safety room was better.
I will say, give some credit to to this coaching staff and to Shane about moving on from Logan Ryan and giving Julian Love the opportunity to prove that he can be that guy. I wish they took that opportunity and parlayed it into keeping him because he's a very valuable player who made a good deal. But we've since then have rebuilt that safety room. So
I would still do the edge to the old room.
I agree.
Yeah. All right, let's go to cornerback, which I think is our last position group to go over, other than special teams. So cornerback, our starting line cornerbacks then were James Bradbury, who they eventually cut to save cap space.
Yep.
Adoree Jackson, who was coming off a good year in 21. Um, their backups were Aaron Robinson and Keon Crossan at the end of the season, with Jaron Williams as a backup. Aaron Robinson had been hurt, of course. Um, I think Valentine was still on this team, if I'm not mistaken.
Darnay Holmes,
Darnay Holmes was hurt, but he was on the team. Um, yeah,
Darius Williams,
for Darius Williams, I forgot about him. He was on the team.
Sam Beal,
So that was the team. That was the room. It was Bradbury, Adoree, Aaron Robinson, Rodarius Williams, Keon Crossan. That was basically the room.
Darnay. Darnay was healthy for a good
Darnay,
bit of the year.
you're right. Darnay was here. Um, then at the end of last year, it was Deontay Banks, Drew Phillips, Cordell Flott, Adoree Jackson, Trey Hawkins. They had D. Williams and Art Green also on the team. And now it is it's Drew Phillips, Deontay Banks, Paulson Adebo, Corey Black, who they just drafted, Trey Hawkins, Cordell Flott, um, D. Williams, Nick Jones, and Art Green, and O'Donnell Fortune, the UDFA from South Carolina. Are we better or worse?
I'd say at the time we are a worse room. I certainly you could make an argument for the trajectory of this room and what it's going to be over the next couple of years, but you had James Bradbury who went ahead and started for a team that went to the Super Bowl and the Philadelphia Eagles after we cut him. You have Adoree Jackson, who was still our CB1 that for really the next 2 years after that, and was coming off, like I said, a really good year. And then, obviously we did not have the strongest depth in that room. And I think that would be the argument here would be, Darnay Holmes was a football player. They were using Julian Love at times as a corner there. And, he stepped in, but for Darius Williams, the depth was pretty bad. That's certainly the argument used against it. But I would say James Bradbury and Adoree Jackson's the reason I would lead the old room.
I disagree here. I think the room, I think, is improved right now. I don't know if I could have said that before we brought in Paulson and Debo, but having a Debo and Banks as starters is a good duo. Having Drew Phillips in there as your nickel is one of the better nickels they've had in a while.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got, having Flott as a backup is a big deal
Yeah.
because I think he's a quality backup. And this kid, Corey Black, O'Donnell Fortune, like these are talented kids who could make the roster.
Mm-hmm.
Art Green actually wasn't that bad last year either, when he came in. So I actually think the room as a whole is very good. I'm going to give the slight edge to the current room here.
I don't know what Deontay Banks is right now. He was probably the worst starting cornerback in football statistically last year. So it's hard for me to really pick a room where he's starting over a room that had James Bradbury and Adoree Jackson coming off really good years.
It's tough. If you want to call this one a wash, I can live with that. I think we both have a slight disagreement here, but for the most part, I don't think the cornerback room is worse. I think
Yeah,
it's about the
it
same.
was. I definitely would say it was worse before we added Adiba.
Right. All right. So the defense, we love the defense, but when you look at it, we think the safety room is worse. We think the cornerback room is at best about the same, although I think it's a little better maybe. The inside linebacker room, we definitely agree is much better. The edge room is much better, but the defensive line is actually kind of worse unless we see, or at least until we see what guys like Ledbetter and Colston and obviously Darius Alexander do. So, I mean, overall, this looks kind of like a wash, in terms of overall talent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, let's look at it from just to where it was. So, edge rusher, I would say improved even without the changes this offseason. I would say interior defensive lines worse, but either way. I would say off-ball linebacker is improved either way. I would say you can't make an argument at all for cornerback without Adebo. So that is a definitive loss at the end of the season. and safety is a definitive loss at the end of the season.
Yeah,
So it doesn't necessarily change that much, but it turns what become washes to maybe wins to definitive losses
right.
in that most of that secondary.
I'm not going to
And
go through special team. I'm not going to go through special teams here, but let's just say it's the same special teams unit, except we replaced Riley Dixon with Jamie Gillian. Whatever.
small improvement, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. So I think the theme here, when you look at it, is that I think Joe Shane has actually like pulled back up to a little bit better than a tie.
Mm-hmm.
A slightly better roster than he inherited. Granted, these guys are younger, they're staying. Those A lot of those guys who made that roster good in 22 were older.
Yep.
But I think this offseason, he's actually brought this back just past the point where it's better than it was um, with Dave Gettleman. When you look at the snapshot in time, I'm just going to read off the whole roster from before free agency. Neighbors, Slayton, Wandell, uh, Bryceford, Wheaton, Hyatt, Amir Smith, Marset, Andrew Thomas, John Runyon, JMS, Greg Van Roten, Jermaine Illuminor, Josh Azudu, Aaron Stinney, Justin Schlottman, Austin Schlottman, Jake Kubis, Evan Neal, Theo Johnson, Bellinger, Manhurts, Dulcich, Locke, DeVito, Boyle, Tracy, Singletary, Gray. Um, when you read that roster, and like, I'm not so sure that roster is better than what Joe Shane inherited, right?
Yeah.
I feel like obviously the wide receiver room is good, but everything else is like, well, maybe the tackles are better, the wide receivers are better, everything else looks about the same. Um, he's made a lot of strides in the last 3 months, and I can do the same thing on defense, where the names are kind of embarrassing to some degree. Where you're like your defensive line certainly was a ridiculous unit. Now it looks strong. I actually think that the roster he had in February was I think it was basically worse than what Dave Gettleman had. When you go position group by position group, it was close, but I don't think it was above it. And I think Joe Shane has made up a lot of ground here in the last 3 months.
So what would it be? So it would be if we just compare those two. So it would be wide receivers an improvement. That wide receiver Shane. Um Tackles Shane, interior O line Shane, right? Because
Hmm.
that's basically the same one. Tight ends Gettleman, running back Gettleman, quarterback Gettleman. So that's a tie there in offense. Then you would have edge Shane, D line Gettleman, off ball linebacker Shane, cornerback Gettleman, safety Gettleman. So yeah, slight win to Gettleman.
As of February 1st, 2025.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's the situation we were in 3 months ago. And now I would say Shane has won wide receiver. I'll give him a wash on running back. Lost tight end, one quarterback, one offensive line. Um, I think lost defensive line, but one edge linebacker, and has probably pulled even in cornerback. Maybe better, I would say, in cornerback now. And safeties, I don't know. It's a big unknown, but it's probably a little worse. But he's pulled ahead now. I
Mm-hmm.
think he's heading in the right direction. But I mean, the point of the exercise is, yeah, I think John Mara was right. I don't think the roster was better than it was in 2022 when Joe Shane took over. And all of the enthusiasm we have right now as Giants fans is because Joe Shane has turned the last 3 months into like this period of punctuated equilibrium to expand upon the roster.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a good point, and the point would be that when you look at Gettleman's roster, it was one that was older and you didn't really have much upside going forward. There were certainly some younger pieces on it and we're benefiting from some of them now. But there was definitely a lot of older guys on there who really did not have any future, and some that were carrying some of those position groups, like a Leonard Williams, for example, like a Logan Ryan, James Bradbury, Dory Jackson, and now you're seeing a room that is like an entire team that's got a lot of younger. You don't really see pieces aren't aren't or can't be a part of the future for this team.
No. Yeah. I mean, the I think the point here though is that like you know how you always hear the argument that people make like oh this it takes time, it takes years, you got to slowly build a roster. That's clearly bullshit. Right? It's
Yeah.
clearly bullshit because Joe Shane basically spent his first 3 years not building the roster properly and had to turn over people over and over and over again. He's largely put together a big chunk of what we consider to be the better part of this roster in a very small amount of time. It follows like the evolutionary theory of what I just said, punctuated equilibrium. Things stay stagnant for a long period of time, and all change and evolution happens in a very short burst of time. I think we're going through that period right now as Giants fans, where Joe Shane has finally hit his stride, and it's this period of punctuated equilibrium growth, where the roster is really getting better and better. And I feel like he's got momentum on his side, and he's got a vision on his side right now. Um, I would look for him to keep making changes. I don't think this roster is near done actually. I think he's going to keep looking to expand on things like the wide receiver room, the cornerback room. I think the offensive line is not necessarily set. I think he's in a rhythm right now where he's just trying to really bolster up this roster because honestly I think he feels it. He's like I'm making good
Mhm.
moves, things are falling into place, and I'm going to try to bulk up this roster. And this is the kind of thing you see when a team goes from like 3 4 wins to sudden wild card team, right? A sudden playoff contender. Like legitimately, this is the kind of stuff that happens on the roster.
And maybe this is a situation where I don't really see it with the schedule we have this year. But if we do have a 2022 like season, the difference this time around would be like this is actually a roster where you might be able to sustain some of that success.
Yeah, this is built up very quickly. Um, but it's just again, it goes to show one good draft, one good offseason, you can turn this sucker around. And obviously, just improving your quarterback room, it really elevates everything else. I don't think people are as worried about our wide receiver room when you know you have competent quarterbacks in the room. Whatever they are, they're competent, right? I mean, Russell Wilson's a competent
Mhm.
NFL quarterback. Jameis is Jameis, but he can give you competent quarterback play at times. And obviously Jackson Dart, you're hopeful for in the future. Big difference from Daniel Jones on with a broken neck and a busted ACL, Drew Lock and Tommy DeVito. Huge difference in terms of confidence and what you would expect from this roster. So I think things are turned up quite a bit right now. And listen, I'm not saying I expect the playoffs with this schedule, but it would not shock me right now if this team, with all the momentum they have building the roster and all the positivity around them, if they actually battle their way to 8 to 9 wins. That wouldn't shock me at all.
Yeah. We'll see, man. I can see it from a roster standpoint. We're just gonna have to see how we turn out this year and how all the teams are scheduled if they live up to how good people think they're gonna be or if there's, some fall off.
Yep. I know people are crazy. People are going crazy using the word playoffs. Um,
Playoff.
Yeah, listen, I mean, we're probably gonna do a deep dive into it, like the analysis of the roster and like some of the analytics to predict points. And still, Vegas has around like what 5.5 wins, still 6 wins,
Something
something
like
like
that.
that.
Yeah.
And they're usually right. Um, but I will say that what would a competent quarterback have done in terms of points per game with this offense last year? Would it have been worth another 3 to 4 points per game? Or more, right? I would say yeah. I would say at least 3 4 points per game, maybe 5 points per game. I think it would have pushed us into the 20 to 21 point per game territory with just competent quarterback play. I think that's a fair assessment.
Mhm.
Um, so you've got that now. Granted, tough schedule, but you've got that now. And you've added a guy like Scadaboo. He's really the only addition you've made to the playmakers on offense. But Malik Neighbors going into his second year. You brought back Slayton. You still have Wandale. I still think they're looking for impact on offense. That's why I think they're looking around for wide receiver. Maybe one of these kids hits, or maybe they'll find a veteran to bring in here. You just don't know, like what they might do there. But I can see this offense pushing up into the low 20s, 20 to 22, 23 points per game, somewhere in that territory. And this defense with the front seven, I think they'll hold teams down. I think they'll keep them right around the same territory, around 20 to 23 points per game. I wouldn't be surprised if the plus minus on points of the Giants is very close to zero this year.
That would be interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be like you said, it's going to have to be carried by the defense this year. We were a team that had a very, very high stack rate going on early in the year. I think it was I don't know, like 10% or something crazy like that before everybody started getting hurt. And now we added Abdul Carter to that mix. We've added a really good corner. We added a really good safety, and we've added just some dogs to this team, some absolute dogs. So we'll see, man. I could definitely see this defense taking a huge step.
Jay Ferries brings up a good point. The turnover differential between last year and this year kind of burned us. He's right. We were big time plus on turnovers in the 2023 season and were terrible in 24.
Yep.
That's going to be a big story this year, is what our secondary does, because they're going to have pressure on the quarterback. The whole point, the whole design of this defense is that the front guys get there and the guys on the back half have the opportunity to make plays on the football. That's the entire design of this defense. So can they turn the ball over? Tyler Nubin was an interception machine in college. Just has to play in the right position. Holland can pick the ball off. Debo can pick the ball off. Deontay Banks still has not shown the ability to do that. If he could ever turn his head and get his hands up there, maybe he does something. But I think that's a place where you may see this whole season flip. If they start turning the ball over in the secondary because of pressure coming from the front, I do think this team can actually surprise a lot of other teams. And that's why I'm getting the points per game. I actually think we're going to even out on turnovers a little compared to last year. I think we'll be a lot better. I think we'll score more points, and I think our defense will be stronger, even with the tougher schedule. I can see, have you ever heard of the Pythagorean win-loss like formula in baseball, where
Mm,
they estimate based on your points for and points against, your runs for and runs against, your win-loss record? The same thing in points in football can be done. And I really feel like um, when all is said and done, I know it's not gonna be what Vegas predicts, but I'm gonna guess that we're gonna be very close to zero net on points for, points against. And that's why I'm saying I think that I can see this team battling its way to like, an 8 to 9 win team.
yeah. And yeah, I think the point differential is a great point. It's something I brought up a lot of last offseason when people were talking about, you know, what what is the what is the new baseline for this team? People are talking like, well, we won 6 games. That's a baseline. It's like, yeah, but we led the NFL in turnover differential. Like we were like the first team to miss playoffs with leading turnover differential. Like we completely lucked out there, and the chances of us to replicate that were so low. We went completely the other way last year. But hopefully, this year, adding a guy like Holland, adding a guy like Adebo, hopefully having a guy like Tyler Nubin, who we kind of expected to do that for us and didn't do it at all, can change that. I mean, I don't expect Drew Phillips to suddenly be somebody who's taking the football away, or Deontay Banks, but I think there's other guys on this team who can do that for us.
I think adding Holland added two new safeties to this room because it put Tyler Nubin in a position where he will thrive. And I think it's like getting two upgrades at safety, substantial upgrades at safety. And Holland can be where he belongs, in center field for the most part and rotating. I really think it's going to even out compared to 2023 versus 24, and probably tilt a little bit more towards 23 on the turnover margins, I would guess, because I just think the front seven is so aggressive and so talented that it's hard to imagine, there not being opportunities to get the football for the defense. It's just really hard to imagine that, that something went wrong if we're not turning the ball over. And when you add that up to a more competent quarterback room, even though the weapons are not really upgraded beyond maybe Scadaboo, and we'll see how he fits in, that should start evening the scales here. and
Mhm.
I'm gonna take that bet that we're gonna be closer to 500 than people realize.
Yeah. Hey, we'll see, man. I would feel a lot, like I said, I would feel a lot better if it wasn't for the schedule, but I really like the roster we're putting out this year. And that's the NFL, man. Even with the harder schedule, these games are close. It's just gonna be, and I think it's gonna be how we show up in these close games. And if we can win more one possession games than the other team can.
No, I agree. All right, so that's a big roster, depth chart dive compared to 2022 and when Joe Schoen took over to now. And yeah, I mean, for those who came in late, long story short, the roster 3 months ago was not better than the roster Joe Schoen took over. The roster today is better than the roster Joe Schoen took over. What a difference 3 months makes, and I think we're feeling pretty positive about that. Um, where do you want us to make changes here? Because I'm obviously in my optimistic mode right now, and I'm feeling like we're close to being a really good football team. If you were told, hey, Monty, you're in charge of the roster, you've got a few months left before camp to, before the season starts, to improve things, to actually push us into a competitive territory, where are you focusing your efforts here after what we just discussed?
It was one thing I brought up a ton, and you brought up a ton going into free agency that I still feel like we didn't address, and that would be, I think, the biggest thing that we could do is adding legitimate swing tackle. I don't think that we added that. I didn't like our additions there, and I still feel like we are an Andrew Thomas injury away from this entire season falling apart on us, like it has the last couple of years. So I don't know at this point in the offseason what you're going to do that much to improve the starters on this team, but I think adding a tackle that you're more comfortable with that doesn't allow the whole season to fall apart, that would be my answer. What about you?
Wide receiver. Um, I agree with you about swing tackle, but I feel like adding Marcus Bowe has changed that for me. I mean, it's part of the reason I wanted Marcus Bowe,
Mm-hmm.
because while there is a concern, Dash and I have this discussion, the 32-inch arm threshold, there's data on this. It's really hard to be a successful starting tackle unless you've reached the 33-inch like arm length threshold. Um, Now, supposedly the Giants measured his arms and they're over 33 inches. Did you hear this rumor?
Yeah, I did hear that.
I don't know what the hell is going on with arm length measurement.
What,
But he
bro?
measured under 33 at the Senior Bowl, if I'm not mistaken, and at the Combine, right?
Why can't we just do this electronically? Why are we measuring everything with fucking like
It's like
sticks
it's
and
like
rope?
it's like the first down
That's
markers,
what I'm
right?
saying, dude. We finally made that electronic. Can we just like fucking like scan somebody's body and figure out what their length is? Like, what are we doing here?
hmm hmm No, I'm with you. Um, but let's just, for argument's sake, say he's close enough to 33 inches.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think Marcus Bowe is a kid who can play swing tackle. Like I don't want that for him this year. I'd like to see him sit and develop into whatever they want him to be, whether it's a tackle, guard, center, whatever. I think he's probably going to be either a guard or a center, but I think he can play swing tackle, and he's athletic. I mean, we've talked about him a bunch. He's athletic enough and has the foot speed to, at minimum, he can mirror guys, right, and
Mm-hmm.
give you time in pass pro. I don't know if he's going to be a plus run defender as a tackle at the NFL level, but I think he'll be a good pass protector, and he'll be a guy who can mirror and give your quarterback time to throw the football. Russell Wilson had time to throw 2.84 seconds last year. He had an unfortunately high pressure to sack rate of 23.1%. That's not good.
No.
So you are going to need to basically give him a little extra time. You have to protect him because for Russell Wilson to do Russell Wilson things to hurt teams, he's going to need that full 2.5 seconds. It sounds like almost 3 seconds to get the ball out. Um, so you're right. You have to address swing tackle, but I think Bo does, and they obviously like Hudson. I don't like Hudson, but they like Hudson. They gave him a
Yeah.
pretty decent contract.
Yeah. Sounds like it. And yeah, no, I mean, look, if I think Bo has the athleticism to play tackle, but yeah, I mean, the arm length is a big one. You really do not see successful tackles in the NFL with arms that come underneath 33 inches. So if he is at 33 inches, hey, that's a threshold, but it's tough.
I will say when you look at his part of the reason arm length matters obviously is because you want to be able to cover enough ground on your wide angle rushes where you can actually get these speed rushers who are bending around the edge and get your hands on them. But some of that is also your wingspan, right? I think sometimes arm length is not the only factor, and you should take it in context with wingspan. Some of these guys are really broad chested, and they cover a lot of ground just because of their body type. So his wingspan is not that bad. I mean, it's not great, but it's more kind of average. He's in the 37th percentile, a little below average, but nothing crazy. It's his whereas his arm length is in like the 7th percentile or something like that. So I'm actually kind of hopeful that if you asked him to hold up a tackle, I think he could in a pinch. I'm not as bottom line is I'm not as worried about swing tackle as I was before the draft.
Mm-hmm. So who would you add at wide receiver if you wanted to add a guy? Do you have a
It's a
name?
good question. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've told you the type I'm looking for. Personally, I am either adding a guy like Felton to be an X receiver, and I'm just saying, hey, I'm adding an X receiver, and now I'm using a combination of Neighbor, Slayton, and Wandale, and I'm rotating these guys in and out. Obviously, Slayton stays on the field, but I mean, Neighbor stays on the field, but I kind of prefer like another prototype that's flexible, like Neighbors. I want a flanker type. I would like to see Juice Wells make the team. I
Mm-hmm.
really would. I'd like to see the kid make the team because I think he offers that versatility as a rookie. But there are guys like him that are out there who are veterans who could probably do this. I don't know who's going to shake loose, but I'm willing to bet that somebody gets cut. That's a roster, just a roster victim in August when everybody gets cut. And I think again the Giants are going to be third on the waiver wire. Um, I'm willing to bet this is a high priority item for them if they haven't solved the problem by then. But I
So
would I
you
would look for an impact receiver.
so you wouldn't be looking necessarily in the guys out there, more guys who get cut.
I mean, who's out there right now?
Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, DJ Chark, Tyler Boyd. That's really
I
it.
mean, are any of them upgrades over what Wandale Robinson gives you today?
I I'm not out on Amari Cooper, but it seems like the NFL is.
And he seems to be leaning towards going back to Dallas, is what
I
I'm
saw the
hearing. Yeah,
Raiders recently.
yeah. I don't know if he's coming here, but yeah, would I be angry at Amari Cooper for the right price? No. Um, but I
I
mean,
think it would be good for the wide receivers here to have a vet like that in the room.
you saw what he did in Buffalo last year.
Yeah.
I mean, he might just be
Didn't
done.
he was
You
good with
know,
Winston in Cleveland.
that's fair. But no, I'm leaning more towards the kids here, and I want to see who
Mm-hmm.
else might shake loose in free agency. Sometimes good players shake loose. I wouldn't be opposed to trading for somebody. If the right player was out there, I wouldn't be opposed to it. But I think that this wide receiver room needs a little bit of juice, little bit more talent, a playmaker of some sort. So
What
I'm all for looking for one.
here's an interesting one I'll throw out to you, Sal. Would you trade a fifth for Kyle Pitts?
No,
Because that would be the one thing. Like, yeah, we could add a wide receiver, but the tight end is what we're talking about, where we haven't really found a difference maker, and he could give you kind of that X prototype and stuff like that. But yeah, I understand that as well.
you said difference maker, and then you said Kyle Pitts.
He could be though. He could be. That's the
The
thing
only
with
di-
Kyle Pitts.
The only difference Kyle Pitts makes is the difference between Cordell Flott having an interception and not having an interception. That's the difference Kyle Pitts makes. No, dude, he's a bust. Like at this point, he's going into his what, fifth year? He's cooked. Like Kyle Pitts has done nothing in the NFL. Just zero.
I mean,
I
he's
can't.
done nothing to live up to what he's been, but I mean, he's been over like 600 yards like every season of his career.
He's. Do you consider Kyle Pitts an impact player right now in the NFL?
I would consider him a much more impactful player than any of the tight ends we have.
I don't know about that. Yes, I mean it just he's been in the league longer, but he gets a lot of targets because they treat him like a wide receiver. I guess you could say that, but I'm not. I've watched Kyle Pitts play all these years now. I don't see anything that is worth trading for. Like,
I get.
why is Kyle Pitts better than just picking up a Mark Gesicki type if he's out there? Like a receiving guy who's out there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who's necessarily out there. It's just a name to throw out there, though.
I think Fedoni is going to be like an impact player. Like the more you watch him, he's not a bad receiver. He runs. I mean, Matt was right. He runs good routes. He's got pretty crisp footwork. He's a decent blocker. He's got a huge wingspan. He's not going to run away from guys like theoretically Kyle Pitts could, but he's a guy who can be a receiving target that helps, and he can break tackles and get yak. You like all that stuff from tight ends. I think he might be an impact. You're not going to get like a big name. We wanted Harold Fannin Jr. if the picks lined up, right?
Hmm.
He would have been one of those guys, but I'm not thinking that's where we're going to get our guy. I really think we need like another versatile receiver just to put into the room, if nothing else, just to mix it up with Wandale. Somebody who can make some plays. I want somebody who can break off a play or
I
who
just
can
feel
run a
like
good vertical route.
I just feel like if you're adding juice to the offense, it'd be a lot easier to get a tight end onto the field.
Well, where's he playing? I mean, you've got Johnson. You brought in Fedone. You still have Bellinger. I mean, I'm assuming Bellinger might be a victim here of a
Yeah,
cut
I
or a
think
trade.
Bellinger's cooked.
I think they'll try to trade him, and if they don't get a chance to trade him, they may just cut him.
Yeah,
But where are you playing this guy? You know what I mean? Like,
at tight
are
end,
we get
starting him.
uh, over Theo Johnson?
I mean, unless Theo Johnson shows us more.
Tell me which tight end we're so Kyle Pitts is your target. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not necessarily saying Kyle Pitts. I'm just saying that if you're looking to add juice to this offense, I think it'd be a lot easier to do it by upgrading the tight end position than it would be upgrading any of the wide receiver positions.
Dude. I mean, I'm just thinking of what tight end can you get that's out there, that's sitting around out there that can be an impact player for you. I guess maybe Kyle Pitts is the one guy that you could probably lose, but there's a reason for that. So uh,
I
I
just
just
don't
don't.
think I don't think any wide receiver you're adding at this point is changing the win loss column. I
I'm
think
not. I'm not sure about that. You really believe that?
yeah, I do believe that. Who how much are they upgrading over any of the starting wide receivers we have?
It's not just what that player does, though. It's what he represents. He represents your ability to move Wandale Robinson maybe to the bench for a bit and move Malik Neighbors more into the slot. I mean, I think he opens up your offense.
Yeah, I mean, you hope that you could do that with a guy like Hyatt, and it hasn't worked out. But yeah,
How
I
about
mean,
how about Tyler Boyd? What do you think about Tyler Boyd?
I don't think I mean Tyler Boyd to be your wide receiver four. I mean, I wouldn't be against it. I just don't think that would add more than a starting tight end.
Okay, I'll give you some names here. Um, I didn't realize that. Hold on. I'm sorry. Um, I'm going down the list. There's not a lot here. Uh, yeah, not forget it. There's nothing here other than the guys you already mentioned. I don't think we're going to get Cooper. I don't think we're going to get Allen. Sark is an interesting name. He's not a bad player,
Hmm.
but he doesn't add a bunch of juice. Um, l- let's look at the tight ends. I'm curious what's out there. Of the available tight ends, you got Gerald Everett. Would you pay him? He's a receiver.
Gerald Everett would be an interesting name. He could be potentially an upgrade over what you have.
Mercedes Lewis,
I think he's cooked.
Jordan Atkins,
Mm,
CJ Uzamoa,
mm,
Ross Dwelly,
nah,
McCole Pruitt,
I don't
Jeff
think
Swaim,
I don't think there's any tight ends in free agency.
Hayden Hurst.
He used to be. I used to like Aiden Hurst.
Yeah. So you may have to like. That's what I'm saying. I would wait on this. I think the guys we have in the building, the younger receivers, are more likely to be of impact than anything. Like I'm talking specifically Juice Wells and Daquan Felton because they offer something different to this roster than what we have. Those guys, I think, especially Juice Wells, right? If Juice Wells becomes 2022 Juice Wells, if it was his foot injury and maybe transferring that really screwed him up, and now his injury is better and he's settling in and he can be that guy he was, at South Carolina in 2022. That guy, again, that was a potential first round pick. If you get that guy, if there's any semblance of that dude who was explosive, that can change your offense. So I still think wide receiver is where you're going to make that impact. I'd like to see Juice Wells do something.
I mean, I would love to see that. I just don't think we can count on Juice Wells. Like I would love, like I love taking that gamble. I love that we brought in Juice Wells, but like I think there's a much higher chance Zach Pascal is a player for this team than Juice Wells for this year.
Yeah. I got the interest. So Authentic says Amari Cooper, absolutely a winner too. Yeah, I would agree. I just don't think he's coming here.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
mean, well, it depends. You weren't you didn't don't you kind of think Amari's cooked?
I do. But I think of all the guys that are out there, he's the one guy that has the
Yeah, I mean,
potential.
I'm still a little bit high in Amari, so like I could potentially see it, but it depends if you think he's cooked or not.
I just the way he looked in Buffalo was just he looked bad.
Hmm.
Like I don't know, maybe it was the offense just not being in sync with Josh Allen
If
because he was traded midseason. Maybe that's all it was, but
Yeah,
he didn't look good.
that's the thing. Mid-season trade wide receivers tend to struggle a lot. But yeah, if you think Buffalo Amari Cooper is who he is now, then he is not. He might be hurting your win total. But
DK has an interesting name, Michael Meyer
I
from
saw
the
that one.
Raiders.
That's an
That's
interesting one.
the first round pick.
Hmm.
He's a big time receiver at Notre Dame and a big prospect. Brock Bowers before Brock Bowers, right? Like
He
so,
was he was a
he was.
guy that I heard we were considering with our first round pick that year.
That's right. At 25, he was on our
Hmm.
list, right? So
That's what I
Michael
heard.
Meyer hasn't done much there, and obviously
No.
got usurped by Brock Bowers, and he's never going to see the light of day out there. Um, just it's not going to happen. Um, Here's another name that I heard might be on the trading block. Noah Fant. Would you go get him?
I would consider throwing a if like I mean I don't necessarily know if I'm doing all this because I really don't know how much the difference is. But yeah, if you're trying to compete and make a move to save your job and add a winner to this team, yeah, I mean I would probably throw a 6th round pick at it because I think tight end is a spot where I could see you adding the most like improvement on this offense.
The reason I bring him up is because the player who was comped to Noah Fant in this draft class was Elijah Arroyo. And where did Elijah Arroyo go? To the Seahawks. They took him in in the second round of pick 50. That to me signals when you take a tight end at pick 50, especially a guy who was as productive as Arroyo was in college, that to me signals like this is our guy. This is our new tight end. Um, I think Noah Fant's on borrowed time in Seattle. I have to check his contract status. I forgot how old he's. I never thought I didn't think he was that old, right? How old is Noah Fant now? Um, what is he? He's got to be under 30, right? He's 27.
Yep.
Um, I wouldn't be opposed to Noah Fant, dude. Like, I mean, he's not quite as productive as Kyle Pitts when it comes to like the yards and stuff, but I think he's a better player than Kyle Pitts. I think
Hmm.
he's more reliable than Kyle Pitts, and I think he actually helps. He's someone I'd be interested in. I know we're just throwing names around at this point, but um, these are all guys that I think they would consider. I think that they're going to give Theo Johnson a chance here, but if you wanted to add depth to the room, that's a place where you could go. But I still think Juice Wells is that guy that they're going to count on initially to see if he breaks through. If he doesn't, he's a rookie. If he doesn't, I'd be on the lookout for a trade or to see if a veteran shakes loose to add to this room because I just don't feel like they're done there. It feels really incomplete to me.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see. I could definitely see. I mean, I think they obviously think that they need some juice here at wide receiver, and I think that they've done that by adding a ton, a ton of
You
undrafted free agents.
six.
So, we'll see if any of those guys can be something. I don't necessarily know how much they'll move the needle, but I think that they know that they didn't get it. I think they would have liked to add one in the draft and they didn't get a chance. So I think they would like to add some younger player.
Yeah, I don't see them adding a running back at this point. Right.
No.
I think their running back room. I think they're pretty comfortable with what they've got, and it seems like they have a plan there. They're probably going to want to see it through. It's wide receiver to me. That's where they can make a difference here. It's still the area where I see it. And I get your point that if you get a pass catching tight end, he might serve the same role, but there's no Darren Waller out there, not this year.
Yeah. It would just be
So
easier to get him on the field.
yeah. Well, there was a rumor that the Ravens were considering trading Mark Andrews,
That
but
would
they
be a
didn't do it.
difference maker.
But they didn't do it before the
Hmm.
draft, which makes me think it's
Yeah,
not going to happen.
I agree.
But yeah, but if Mark Andrews shook loose, yeah, I
That
think
that
that's a guy
that could
you
give
would
you a
you would
win.
right. That's worth a win or two, I think. So we're just looking for guys who can give us that extra win or two here. I think these are difference maker types, but that's where we are with the roster. Any other thoughts on this?
No, nothing else really.
All right, so we went through the roster. We're going through areas where we can improve. We're gonna have to break down more of this roster as we get further and see how camp shakes out. Um, I want to see how these UDFA's do. I think we know what we have in a lot of the kids we drafted already. They're probably for the most part all making the team. But the UDFA's are like, especially, my eyes are firmly on Juice Wells,
Hmm.
Daquan Felton, and O'Donnell Fortune. Those three. Those are the guys I'm watching because those are three legitimate guys I think can make this team and can improve this roster. Other than that, I'm gonna pay attention this year, honestly. I'm gonna watch other teams. I'm gonna see who looks like a candidate to shake loose, especially at wide receiver or tight end, and see if there's a player we can add to get some wins here because I think we're getting closer. So
Yeah,
that's where I am. All right. Do
yeah.
you have any other thoughts here?
No, I mean, just it should be interesting to keep track of that, and I think at one point it will be a worthy conversation of just where we can project the needs for next year and what we're going to think for where should be looking at the college football season because for once, hopefully the answer isn't quarterback.
It won't be. I could give two shits about the quarterback class for next year now.
Yeah.
Like when we do our quarterback reviews, I don't give a fuck because we have our quarterback. So
Hmm. At
I
least for
really
this
don't
year and
care.
next year.
Yeah, we have our quarterback for the next couple of years. I don't care. I mean, we'll do it. We'll do our Cade Klubnik review one more time. But
Yeah.
but
It
it's
was
not. It's
reviewed all these guys except for
right,
like Sellers.
right. It won't take too much work. No, I think we're gonna be right back in the wide receiver room like we were in our very first episode. We're gonna be right back in the wide receiver room and
Wide
thinking,
receiver.
how do you make Malik Neighbors' game even better? Right? Who can you
Hmm.
put out there to help him? So a lot more to come. I think we're with that. We are gonna have to start getting into the 26 prospects though. And I don't know. I was thinking we should just jump in earlier this season and get this out of the way as fast as possible so we can focus on really deep diving as the season goes on. So we'll get into that stuff. But as always, thank you guys for joining us. Shorter episode than usual today. Um, because things are good and happy in Giants land. There's less to bitch about. Uh, Before we close out, thank you guys for being here. If you haven't already, please like the episode, subscribe to the pod on YouTube if you can. Definitely helps us grow. You can find us and reach out to us on Twitter at He's a Giant Pod. You can reach me at Queens_guy. You can reach out to Monty at MONTECRI5TO. Till we see you guys next time, thank you as always, and go Giants.
Go Giants.